Hidden behind the shining lights of old circuses, there were various performers who were so controversial that their acts were later either banned, erased, or quietly forgotten. But before we see these 10 banned circus freaks, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible facts from history. Prince Randian, the human torso. Prince Randian was born in the late 19th century, and he had no arms or legs due to a condition known as tetra-amelia. But he entered the brutal world of circus sideshows, rather than living in isolation, and his body became both a spectacle and a statement through his performances. He stunned audiences not just by his appearance, but also by what he was able to do, because Randian could write, paint, roll cigarettes, and light them with a match. He used to do that all by using only his mouth while he was lying calmly before 1,000 spectators. Randian shattered all expectations, especially at a time when disability was equated with helplessness and a merciful situation. Circuses used to promote him as the human torso. This was the name that drew crowds towards the shows, but it also stripped away his identity. Still, he learned to navigate the system while earning money and international fame through his stunning performances that demanded extreme patience, control, and intense concentration. All the acts like Randian's started disappearing as public attitudes slowly changed. Critics argued that sideshows only exploited performers rather than celebrating their skills. Laws banned exhibitions that focused on physical differences alone, and Randian's career faded as these regulations spread. Even though the circuses profited heavily only from his body, Randian's true power actually came from his refusal to be pitied, and he turned limitation into mastery. Mirin Dajo, the man who could not be killed. Mirin Dajo was the performer who stunned audiences with acts that looked completely impossible because swords pierced his torso from side to side, and long metal spikes passed through his body without any blood or visible pain. Doctors examined him repeatedly, and they were all baffled by the fact that his vital organs remained untouched after all these demonstrations. Some of his fans believed his body had unusual internal anatomy, while others suspected hypnosis or deception, but no one was able to fully explain it. Dajo himself claimed that his abilities were spiritual rather than physical or biological. He strongly believed that his body could transcend pain and injury through mental discipline, and audiences were heavily mesmerized by his acts, but also disturbed at the same time. When governments began applying tight regulations on live entertainment, several acts that involved extreme bodily harm were banned for the reason of public safety, and Dajo's performances were deemed too risky, too influential, and too difficult to regulate. But his career ended when a tragic accident during a demonstration led to fatal complications and internal injuries. The mystery of whether he was a medical anomaly, a master illusionist, or something else entirely remains. Mirin Dajo is easily one of the most unsettling figures in the entire history of entertainment, and he represents a time when the human body itself was the ultimate spectacle in circuses and sideshows. Schlitzie, the last of the pinheads. Schlitzie was born with microcephaly, which is a condition that affects skull development and cognitive function. This is the reason why he became one of the most recognizable figures in circus history, and he was widely known for his childlike expressions, colorful robes, and gentle demeanor. Crowds waved, laughed, and stared at him during his performances, while most of them were unaware of the complex human life behind the costumes of circuses. Performers like Schlitzie were considered staples of sideshows for several decades, but the changing attitudes towards disability reframed these acts as cruel, rather than just entertaining. And governments stepped in by banning exhibitions that presented cognitive differences as spectacle. Schlitzie had to struggle to find stability in his life when the freak show era ended, and he depended heavily on caretakers or fellow performers who treated him like family. Despite the exploitation surrounding him, those who were closest to Schlitzie often described him as an affectionate, joyful, and deeply human person. His life raised a difficult question. Was he protected by bans or abandoned by them? Schlitzie's legacy forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that moral progress in society often comes with unintended consequences for some. Joe Martin Lauricella, the Owlman.
He squirms, he twists, he wriggles like a reptile, and voila! Joe Ladello is one of the few people in the world who's actually seen what his back looks like without looking in a mirror. And with this point of view, he's got perfect 20/20 hindsight. Meet the
Joe Martin was the circus freak who earned fame for a talent that looked almost supernatural, as he was able to rotate his head nearly backward. He appeared to stare directly behind himself while walking forward in a straight line. Many people strongly believed that they were witnessing a human owl, and his control over his neck muscles was so precise that even medical professionals studied him in complete disbelief. This stunning ability made him a sensation in early 20th century circuses, while posters exaggerated his movement into something monstrous to fuel both fascination and fear for profits. However, over time, authorities started questioning whether such acts encourage dangerous limitations or cause physical harm, and those acts were either restricted or outright banned, which involved extreme physical contortion due to the gradual evolution of health and safety laws. The Owlman faded into obscurity, and Lauricella's performances started disappearing from public view, but his story highlights how fear often drives censorship. Even though his act harmed no one, it still challenged the ideas of what a human body should be capable of, and that challenge made it unacceptable to the authorities. Today, Joe Martin is remembered not as a monster, but as a reminder of how quickly any monster can turn into prohibition. Johnny Eck, the man who defied gravity. Due to a rare condition that affected Johnny Eck's spinal development, he was born without the lower half of his body. Doctors predicted a limited and short life for him, but they were wrong, as Eck became one of the most athletic and energetic performers ever to step into a sideshow ring. He managed to walk effortlessly on his hands while performing acrobatics, playing musical instruments, and even dancing across stages with an astonishing level of balance. Unlike many performers, Johnny embraced performance as art, rather than just shock value to attract heavy crowds. He insisted that audiences focus on what he could do, and not what he lacked. This was the confidence that carried him into films, including a role that immortalized him in the early history of cinema. However, as social reform movements gained traction, exhibitions that centered on physical anomalies were increasingly criticized, and public pressure eventually led to bans on traditional freak shows across many regions. Johnny's act, which was once celebrated, was now seen only as controversial, and opportunities started vanishing for him almost overnight. Rather than choosing to fade into obscurity, he reinvented himself by pursuing painting, photography, and magic. He built a creative life beyond the circus. His story exposes the double-edged nature of reform, because while bans protected future generations from exploitation, they also erased livelihoods for performers who had found empowerment through the stage. The life of Johnny Eck proves that identity is not defined by anatomy alone, and this kind of resilience often emerges from places where society once even feared to look. If you're enjoying this video, then don't forget to subscribe for more crazy facts about the entertainment industry. Grady Stiles Jr., the Lobster Boy. This circus freak was born with split hands and feet. Grady Stiles Jr. was the one who inherited both a condition and a career. His family had performed in sideshows for several generations, but unlike many performers, Grady's life eventually spiraled into violence and tragedy. He had to struggle a lot to adapt when sideshows were outlawed and fame faded completely. Resentment started growing, and his personal life collapsed into crying. His story is often used as evidence that the free show system failed its performance once the spotlight disappeared. Grady's life portrays how exploitation does not end when the curtain falls, and sometimes the damage only starts afterwards. The Two-Headed Man, a forbidden marvel. Those performers who were among the most shocking attractions in circus history were born with parasitic twins, because the presence of a second, partially developed head fascinated and horrified audiences at the same time. The Two-Headed Man had to live under constant medical scrutiny and public pressure beyond the shock factor that attracted heavy audiences. Doctors repeatedly debated about his condition, while crowds treated him only as an anomaly rather than a person. His existence was no longer allowed on stage as ethical laws expanded, and such exhibitions were eventually deemed unethical. They were also banned eventually, as medical understanding improved over time. These performers vanished from public view almost entirely, and their stories were deliberately erased. The only thing that remains is a haunting reminder of how fear can silence even the rarest human experiences. Ella Harper, the Camel Girl. Due to a rare skeletal condition, Ella Harper's knees could bend backward, and this made it easier for her to move on all fours. Circus promoters quickly capitalized on her appearance, and they started branding her as the Camel Girl. This promotion helped circuses attract audiences due to curiosity, but Ella herself viewed the circus only as survival and not spectacle. She maintained dignity and control over her performances despite his limited mobility due to this condition, and she used the income to pursue education later in life. She eventually left the circus and progressed in life. Acts that centered heavily on physical difference were outlawed as public opinion changed with time, and performers like Ella vanished from the main spotlight. but her story still stands out among all the other circus freaks because she was the one who managed to escape this trap of exploitation. She refused to let the label define her entire existence, and Ella Harper represents the quiet strength of those who had to suffer through all this long enough to reclaim their own future. Pip and Flip, the Yucatan twins. Pip and Flip became widely known in traveling shows because they were both conjoined twins with cognitive disabilities, and their cheerful personalities endeared them to various audiences. But behind all these small wheels, there was a life that was shaped by constant scrutiny, and they were presented only as curiosities rather than individuals. When governments cracked down on sideshows, all the acts that involved conjoined or cognitively disabled performers were among the first to be banned. The careers of several twins ended abruptly, leaving them heavily dependent on caretakers. Their legacy later influenced different fictional portrayals, but the real Pip and Flip remind us that behind every spectacle, there were a pair of lives that were shaped by forces that were beyond their own control. This ban marked a turning point where compassion started to outweigh curiosity. Cuckoo, the bird girl. Cuckoo had a facial condition, and she transformed it into a performance by adopting bird-like movements and elaborate costumes. Unlike many other circus freaks, she eventually leaned into theatrical expressions by turning her difference into dance. Cuckoo's performances were more than spectacle because they were actually carefully crafted expressions of movement and rhythm. She regained control over how audiences perceived her appearance by mimicking various birds. When freak shows were banned, her artistic voice vanished from the central public stage, and it left behind only some photographs as fading memories of her performances. Her act was eventually banned because authorities deemed it demeaning, but her creativity survived as proof that self-expression can exist even in the most restrictive environments. These performers were erased, hidden, and banned, but their stories still matter because they challenge how we define dignity, environment, and humanity itself. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to subscribe to our channel for more untold stories of human history.